Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tanya Smigaki, and I'm head of community and partnerships here at Vantage Ventures. For those of you who are new to our community, Vantage Ventures is born out of the John Chambers School of Business and Economics here at West Virginia University. It serves to launch high-impact, scalable businesses that are tackling complex problems. And we're home to a fearless new generation of entrepreneurs. Joining us today for our Real Talk is our esteemed guest, Joe Kapp, president and co-founder of the National Center for Resource Development. Through his work, he's helped numerous organizations thrive by being intentional about increasing resources, identifying innovative new resources, and creating effective partnerships that create long-term impact. Joe's launched a number of national initiatives, including the National Entrepreneurship Week and Rural Rise. Both focus on income equity, increasing access and resources and opportunities for all Americans. He also was appointed to the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the United States Department of Commerce, and recently was named to the Advisory Council for Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. We're honored to have this serial entrepreneur here with us today to learn about his diverse experience. Please note, this will be a moderated panel to start, and then we will open it into a nice Q&A. This panel will be recorded, and we look forward to having a very good, rich discussion. So thank you, Joe, for joining. I guess I will start off with my first question. Can you tell us a little bit, what do you think an impact entrepreneur is?
Well, it's funny because, that question itself is actually from my own perspective. Now, I want to go ahead and put a disclaimer out there. Everything that I'm going to say is on behalf of myself and is not a representation of the organization, National Center for Resource Development. And the reason I say that is because I actually don't necessarily really like the word impact entrepreneur. The reason why is because if you are an entrepreneur, whether it is starting a business or starting something that is going to move the needle on one of society's problems, you're an entrepreneur. And studies show that successful entrepreneurs give back in a variety of different ways. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a little bit redundant to say impact entrepreneur, because entrepreneurship in a variety of different ways has an impact on local communities. There is a distinction in terms of the mission and the direction of entrepreneurs and what ultimately, they hope to achieve. But as you and the folks listening are thinking about entrepreneurship, people like to use the term entrepreneurship, impact entrepreneurship, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a distinction without a difference, in large part because studies show that entrepreneurs give back in greater amounts. So whether or not you set out to be an entrepreneur that's going to, in addition to making money, have some sort of impact. If you become successful, by and large, entrepreneurs identify other opportunities to give back in other ways. So I just prefer the word entrepreneur and lump everybody together because ultimately, I think everybody gets back to that. It's really the focus and the mission and also the sustainability model that I think is the distinction. For a lot of people who are thinking about, from a nonprofit perspective, how their particular venture is going to make money is going to be very, very different than something that's a for-profit seeking venture. Does that make sense?
Yes. And how would you say you became involved in impact investing?
My desire to make a difference started in college. When I was 19 years old, I was just coming out of the closet, and HIV and AIDS was prevalent, and I wanted to make sure that I learned as much as possible about the disease so that I could be as informed as possible, try to make sure that I don't become HIV positive. And so I started volunteering for the Florida HIV and AIDS hotline. And it was during that experience that I saw a lot of friends. So while most of my friends in college were going to football games and going to parties, I actually I had actually started my first business, which was a video production company. And I also, on Sundays, I would volunteer for the Florida HIV/AIDS hotline, providing insights and just helping people who would call. And it was during that time that I saw a number of people passing away, getting kicked out of their homes. And I wanted to do more. And so I got more involved in the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And my senior year of college, I wrote the application to bring the quilt to Tallahassee and display it in order to increase awareness. And then from that, I was asked to oversee this main stage of the unfurling of the quilt in Washington, D.C. And it was through those series of experiences that I realized we're only here for a short period of time. And we can sit around and wait for somebody to knock on our door, and you'll be waiting your whole entire life, and then look back and say, what happened? Why didn't anybody notice my wonderful pearls of wisdom or genius? And seeing my friends who'd passed away made me realize that I wanted to be in a situation where I did two things. The one is I wanted to make sure that I was taking care of myself, that I didn't have to rely on anyone or anybody, that I couldn't get kicked out of my home, that I couldn't get fired from my job. And so I had to go ahead and be intentional about that piece. The second piece is I wanted to make sure that in all of the work that I did, there was a course of having an impact, a societal impact, a beneficial impact. And how do we do that? How do I personally do that? So that one of my first jobs out of college, I began working on computers and working for large corporations, and before going back into entrepreneurship. And it felt like I was not having the impact that I wanted to have. And so as a result of that, I quit my job, went backpacking through Asia, and realized that I was on the wrong path, sitting in meetings for large companies and Johnson & Johnson and global Fortune 500 companies, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I wanted to have a much more granular impact. And so that's when I went back into entrepreneurship. I started a business. And then over the last several years, or probably over the last 10 years, just began to start a number of different businesses with those two goals. One is taking care of me and my partner, and making sure that we were self-reliant, not having to go ahead and rely on anybody else for anything. And the second is then being able to have us impact in a way that I felt when the time comes, and I'm no longer around, there will have been a substantive impact on society in a beneficial way. And so that's kind of the thread that has led me to starting some nonprofits, and also focusing on entrepreneurship as a means for helping people who maybe have lesser means, or have been historically marginalized, or haven't been felt like they've had an ability to have a seat at the table. Sort of being an advocate for those people to really craft their own identity and their own direction to build out what they want to see for their future in their own life.
Excellent. I saw the AIDS quilt in New York, and I was actually born in Tallahassee.
Oh, is that right?
I haven't been back, but but my dad's a Florida Stater as well.
Ah, okay. All right. Yeah.
So as an entrepreneur, and you're a serial entrepreneur, you have so much experience. How do you think it was when you would come into a rural community? How did you gain trust and buy-in? Do you have any words of wisdom that you would give to maybe someone who's a non-native who comes into a new community, and advice that they can have from you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's about motive. What is the underlying motive? And it's not. This isn't just a rural community. This is any community that maybe you don't necessarily identify or doesn't identify with you. What is your underlying motive? And that's pretty transparent. I think that can become, for a lot of people aren't stupid, and the ability for them to understand what your underlying reason is for doing whatever it is you're doing becomes pretty transparent pretty quickly. And so I think one of the things is being authentic and showing up in an authentic way, but with grace and gratitude and humility. I think that there have been circumstances where maybe early on I didn't necessarily understand that or appreciate it in the same way. But when you're working in any community, whether it's rural or it's a community that you don't necessarily identify with, you have an obligation first to understand and listen and not presume that you know the answer, that you're walking in with a set of defined outcomes, because it's important to understand the background that has gotten a community to where it is. That community is where it is because people have done some hard work beforehand. And it's important to honor and recognize that that work has been done by people who care about a community and work hard building up those communities. And so honoring that is a really good place to start. And you do that by listening to people's stories and hearing both the pain and the challenges, but also the success stories. And so I think, you know, in the work that I've done, I've had the opportunity growing up from a guy, you know, a guy in Miami Beach to working in rural communities across the United States. And I think, you know, being humble about, you know, the ability to create opportunities. By and large, also the work that I've been doing has been focused on elevating individual entrepreneurs and communities to increase economic development opportunities. And oftentimes it's a little hard to get angry at somebody if they're trying to do that, if they're really authentic. So, but the opposite side of the coin is here. I think my early experience in college made me realize is that you kind of have to let go of caring what other people think. You kind of have to let go of this idea that other people's opinions matter. We're only here for a short period of time, and you know, when all is said and done, what matters isn't necessarily, you know, there's a quote that I like to tell people: what other people think of me is none of my business. And in order for us and the folks who are listening to become effective entrepreneurs, you have to let that go. You have to let go the voice that says, I'm going to compare myself to other people. And you have to let go the voice that says, I'm going to listen to what other people say, because otherwise, ultimately, it'll hold you back from whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And whether you're an artist or a creator or an entrepreneur, hearing those voices, the voice that you need to pay attention to is the one that's in your heart that says this is the direction that you're going to go, and to be self-effacing and kind, because not everybody's on the same journey, but also be resilient and strident in the direction, because not everybody's going to understand your journey as well. And so for me, it's always been important to be able to comport myself with a level of dignity and self-respect, but also share that for other people as well. For even the people who have maligned me, and I have had experiences where people have threatened me. They have threatened property that I own. I have been physically assaulted for the work that I've been doing. And in my heart, I have grace for those people, because unfortunately for them, they're in a place that has fostered such levels of frustration that they feel the need to be unkind to another human being in order for them to propel whatever their goals are. That's not the way that I comport myself, and that's not the way that I want my journey and my legacy to be. But each of us has to make a decision about how we want to go ahead and move through this world. And I think to the extent that we as entrepreneurs can let our egos down and allow ourselves to listen. I'm going to say something that may sound like it's conflicting what I said earlier. It is important to listen to those critics, because sometimes they have things that are actually valuable for you to hear, especially if you're building a business. If somebody's criticizing a product, you need to be listening to that. So it's a dance, but the people who may come after you in a personal way, and make it very personal, are just people that you don't want in your life, and you really have to figure out ways to go ahead and remove those elements so you can move to the things that you want to focus on.
So you started the National Center for Resource Development. Can you tell us what led you to start that, and share a bit about your role and efforts in building this innovation community?
Yeah, so I started the National Center for Resource Development because I wanted to apply a lot of the things that I had learned in corporate America and business in a setting that would help and advance nonprofits and organizations that focus on missions that are important to me. rather than always trying to start a new organization that's going to go ahead and do things that I am interested in. I wanted to find out a way to support those organizations that are already doing it, but maybe they don't have the skills, the resources, the talent, or the experience of taking tools, methodologies, resources that I've had the wonderful opportunity to be able to glean over the years of working with hundreds of businesses, maybe thousands of businesses at this point, and be able to share that with organizations that have a mission that is in concert with my own values. And so the National Center for Resource Development was a nonprofit that I started with Tina Metzer. Tina's from West Virginia. And as we started to get more into the work that we were doing, we began to realize that there's a significant opportunity to help those organizations. And so in large part, it was done. I started that because I wanted to be able to work with organizations that I really care about, but work with more than just one organization. I have ADHD, so my ability to focus has always been a little bit of a challenge. In fact, very many successful entrepreneurs have ADHD. They're probably the highest profile entrepreneur with ADHD is Richard Branson. There is a propensity because of the ability to be able to focus on a lot of different things. But also as we go through the world, we kind of pick little pieces of information that are important, and we can assemble them in a way that maybe people who don't have ADHD have. And so that allows us to come up with super creative ways to look at things that are innovative and create spaces in markets that maybe haven't previously been identified. And so NCRD was created out of a need and a desire to help smaller organizations focus their missions on becoming much more strategic about their goals, help identify fundraising plans, going after that fundraising, and increasing organizational efficiencies.
Well, when I read some of your biography, I know you started, entrepreneurship in college. Obviously, you're a risk taker. Where do you think that tenacity comes from?
I would disagree with that, right? Like I would disagree when people say you're a risk taker. It's actually not really true. My goal was to actually mitigate risk, to de-risk my life. And I saw having one person be my client, having one job, having a particular focus on one particular person, one particular company that had a sway over my life. That seemed to me like it was actually risky. The prospect of being able to go ahead and have, 5 or 6 different businesses, all of which can produce income and also provide a sense of very gratifying work. That to me actually was not risky. So I have a contention when people say, oh, you seek out risk, or it's actually quite the opposite, because I saw so many gay men who were fired from their jobs in the 80s. But that was risky, right? They had only one income stream and they had that only thing to rely on. And so I actually don't view myself I see myself actually as being fairly risk averse. And if you speak with most successful entrepreneurs, they will probably tell you that they're actually not risk takers. They would probably say that they make calculated bets. There's actually a principle from Dr. Sarah Sarasvathy, who's out of University of Virginia. And she coined this term affordable loss. The notion is that as entrepreneurs, you should be identifying that which you're willing and able to lose. I've changed that to say acceptable, not affordable, because there's a lot of things I can afford, but whether or not I want to accept that as a risk. So for example, I can afford to go ahead and own a hot dog cart in New York City, but do I really want to? No, that's not an acceptable risk. So when you look at acceptable risk, what is it I'm willing and able to lose that's not going to sacrifice my life, my lifestyle, my family, my finances? And most successful entrepreneurs de-risk various projects that they're going to take on based on sort of that principle. They may not call it that, but that certainly is what's going on, is that they'll put on glasses in the morning and they'll say, okay, how do I de-risk various projects? And the wealthier you become, the more risks you can take, but the less impact that one particular project or event will have on your life, because you have more things that are going on, a number of different irons in the proverbial fire. And so this notion of risk, I think that popular media does us a huge big disservice, because oftentimes they portray the entrepreneur as the person in their basement who's cashed out their 401k and thrown caution to the wind. Those are sexy stories, but the preponderance of entrepreneurs are not like that. They're really not. They are people who have taken very, very calculated steps in the direction. They know the direction that they want to go. And increasingly, there are people who are on this phone or who are on this call today or are listening. There are people who identify the direction that they want to go and start focusing on customers, customer development, customer activity at the very earliest to de-risk whatever venture it is that they're going to go down, or the path that they're going to go down. So my contention is that, me taking a risk is actually opposite. I wanted to set myself up and my husband up to be in a situation where we had control and dominion over our own time and our own energy, especially coming out of what I saw in my early 20s. And so that's why we're able to go ahead and take the month off to go to Alaska and do various things that are certainly things that many people dream about, and I feel very grateful and very the decisions that we've made and that I've made have borne out to be rewarding, and I'm very grateful for all of those pieces. So.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about your experiences and learnings at the National Advisory Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the EDA?
Yeah, so if you don't put yourself out there, you're not going to get it. And I think that in many regards, our schooling kind of, no offense to any of the people here from academia that may be listening, but our schools sometimes are a little bit like whack-a-mole, right? Where you say that there's an answer for a particular problem or a solution, and that's not the way that works. And so I was chatting with some folks, and they said you should go ahead and apply to the National Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Department of Commerce, and that is an advisory council. I was appointed under the Obama administration in 2016. And I had the opportunity to be able to meet a number of other amazing entrepreneurs and people. And one of the classes that I teach, I talk about networking. The importance of being an entrepreneur, probably the single most challenging thing that if I were to ask everybody on this call, they would probably say money is the biggest challenge for building a business. And actually, it's not really true. But we'll go with that. The second thing that they'll tell you is networks and meeting people. I started teaching a class, your network is your net worth, and how do you create a network and expand it? And how do you do that both organically and intentionally? And the National Advisory Council was a little bit of both. I had started a number of successful businesses and then ultimately retired out to West Virginia and began working with a local community college on entrepreneurship. And I really became fascinated about how we leverage entrepreneurship to create new opportunities, both for ourselves, but then also how do we infuse that to other communities? And so being a part of the National Advisory Council on Innovation at the Department of Commerce really opened up my eyes to the array of services and opportunities that the federal government provides for entrepreneurs and how we can take advantage of that. And so over time, I got to learn and meet a number of different people from a number of different organizations and within the federal government. That in part led to me relaunching National Entrepreneurship Week for the United States. When I began to realize there's just so many incredible resources that our government is making available, but most people don't realize it. And so in about five or 6 years ago, I relaunched National Entrepreneurship Week to really elevate entrepreneurship education, access to funding, and those sorts of things. The National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship serves as a bit of a town hall for people who are like-minded to provide insight and guidance into potential policies for the Department of Commerce. And so when I left that, I decided that I wanted to be able to have a greater impact and began working on National Entrepreneurship Week as a way to work more collaboratively with more organizations and more government agencies. At the same time, I learned a lot about a lot of different things in that role. And it's led to some just amazing events and adventures in my life that have taken me around the world, to both teaching entrepreneurship as well as being a student of entrepreneurship. And that's the other thing, is that entrepreneurship in and of itself is a lifelong learning endeavor. If you really engage in entrepreneurship, whether you are a landlord running, a variety of different properties, or you run a nonprofit, or you have a consulting business, when you wake up from one day to the next, there's almost consistent change, which feeds in really well to my ADHD, but also with the accelerating pace of change that's taking place, around the world. It's actually a skill set that is, I would say, probably one of the most important skill sets that's going to be required of people, because the pace of change is just going to continue. If you look at COVID and what's happened with COVID, all of a sudden, the world was asked to rethink about the way that we view the world, and businesses were asked to rethink about their business models in a heartbeat. And businesses that we thought were going to be around forever, all of a sudden collapsed. Those businesses that weren't able to change, many of them are no longer around. So leveraging networks and people and being a part of the National Advisory Council allowed me to really look at things from a little bit of a different perspective, in understanding how we promote entrepreneurship as a means and a tool for economic development.
Well, as an educator, could you give us any advice to the young entrepreneur that you would think would be like sort of indispensable, specific coursework that a person should have for a budding entrepreneur?
You're not going to like my answer. You're not going to like
Is it math and science?
No. I don't think it's coursework. Everything, when I got into computers, I got into it before the days of the internet. Everybody can date me and everybody can, but I got into it before there was an internet. And so in order to learn technology, I went to the library. I couldn't afford books at the time to buy that many books. So I went to the library and just checked out a bunch of books, and database for dummies, SQL code for dummies, coding for dummies. Traditional pedagogy, traditional education, I think there's a really good place for it. And so I want to be very clear about my message here, because I'm not saying that we shouldn't have that. But the reality is that if you're building a business, and maybe it's the first time that you're doing it, you can get a lot of really good advice. But the challenge is, and this is what I said before, is that traditional pedagogy and education says that there's an answer. Right? You have to get the answer. That's not the way it works with entrepreneurship. And so I think that self-learning and understanding what that looks like is really important. I will say that some of the new pieces that have come out in education around entrepreneurship more recently, like different methodologies, different tools and resources, for example, minimum viable product or business model canvas. Some of those structures can help people build businesses. But at the end of the day, if you're doing something that is uniquely you, and let's say Chelsea is creating something that is uniquely her and befitting her skill set, Chelsea, I got news for you. It's probably not going to be in a book somewhere, because unless you've written a biography or unless you've written an autobiography or you've written a biography, not many people are going to understand the skills that you bring to the table in order to create a business that's going to suit the needs of both you and your customers. So I think that And that's actually one of the pieces that, as an educator, I've been strident in my conversations about and working with teachers and professors across the world to say, look, let's not go ahead and box people in to say this is the answer, because by and large, that black and white sort of outlook prevents people from building successful businesses. I have a slide that I use, and I talk about the fact that we have to pivot. And I don't know if you've ever done any reading about entrepreneurship. There's sort of the entrepreneurial pivot, and that's going to where the customers are. Think about all of those businesses for a second that were restaurants during the beginning of COVID, right? All of a sudden, they had a pivot. They had to figure out a way to stay alive. And that was either by becoming a member of DoorDash or developing their own delivery systems, because people were not going to restaurants, right? And so if you were a business, a restaurant, and you didn't have enough cash on hand to survive, really bad times, you ended up in a situation where you probably closed your doors. And so, Tanya, I'll ask you, where do you go for that kind of education?
We could never foresee it probably, right? I mean,
we couldn't foresee that. We wouldn't have certainly foreseen I'll give you another example. I've had the opportunity to go ahead on behalf of the United States State Department and train a whole bunch of different entrepreneurs around the world. Last year, before all of this nonsense over with Russia got started, I had the opportunity to train some entrepreneurs over in Ukraine. It was all done virtually because of COVID, but we spent about 10 weeks going through a number of different things. And my entrepreneurs, we would regularly communicate. Well, at the very beginning of the war, I reached out to them and I said, listen, my husband are here to support you guys. Let us know how we can do it. And we've sent over thousands of dollars over to them to help some of our entrepreneurs retool. One of them was a guy named Dennis, who ultimately was killed. He was creating toys as his business for kids over in Ukraine, and closed up shop and went to go fight. Another one is a guy who was a clothing manufacturer, making clothing, women's clothing mostly. And at the very beginning of the war, I said, look, you're going to have to change your business because not a lot of people are going to be. And so I worked with him to convert his business to creating army fatigues and military gear and those sorts of things. Where are you going to get that? Where are you going to get that? So it's not that I have, I believe that education is a lifelong learning event, and we have an obligation ourselves to take that on, to learn what we feel like is going to be important to us. And I think the role that education can play significantly in preparing people is to help people understand methodologies that allow for de-risking of projects. Project management skills. How do you take something from concept to execution to sustainability? Those types of things, those hard skills can be taught, but the day in and day out of how you're going to build a successful business, that's going to come from just doing it. And it's going to come from taking it on the chin and having customers yell at you because you didn't fulfill a product successfully, or you did something, that didn't work. You just learn that along the way. I'd never imagined that I would at probably the ages of most of these people who are listening, I never imagined that I would have been a landlord. Can't even tell you how much stuff I've learned about HVAC and heating systems and plumbing and sump pumps and roofs. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. You get to learn as much as you want. And ideally, if you're doing it right, you get to learn as much as you want, and somebody's paying you for it. Or it's something that is so incredibly exciting because you're doing work that really matters to you. God, what a great way to spend life, right? Doing stuff that really matters to you, or stuff that you really enjoy learning about, and somebody pays you for that. There's no better way to spend a life, man. I got to tell you that for sure.
So can you give us, what do you think was one of your best pieces of professional advice you ever received?
Avoid the crab pot.
Does that occur to the chicken coop?
No.
I read the chicken coop story.
Yeah, no. When I was in graduate school, it just kind of harkens back to what I had mentioned earlier. I had the opportunity to rent a room from an African-American guy who was a businessman in he lived in Philadelphia, but he would commute during the week and stay in New York. And so he had extra space. And so I ended up staying, and he shared with me this idea. And he said, Joe, do you know what the crab pot is? I said, I don't know what that is. He said, you have to, in the course of your life, you have to avoid the crab pot. If you take a bunch of crabs and you put them in a pot, the reality is, if you ever kind of like walk by a place where they have a bunch of crabs, the crabs are still alive, but they don't crawl out. And what happens is that as one tries to leave, they pull it back down. And so the crab pot, what I call crab pot syndrome, he called it the crab pot, is the propensity for people who are jealous, who are small-minded, to pull you back down. Hey, you don't know where you're going. You don't know what your level is. We're going to go ahead and pull you back down. And that happens in a variety of different ways. And you can't allow that to happen. You have to go ahead and say, you know what, this is the direction that I'm going, and I'm not going to let anybody else pull me down. And those people can be insidious. They can be related to you. They can be unrelated to you. They can be, and that's why I said you have to be very careful about who you listen to when you're on trajectory. And this isn't just about entrepreneurship. This is about your own life. We're only here for a short period of time. And so you got to get on with it. And the crab pot, avoiding the crab pot, is one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give. Because if you spend a lot of time, if you go ahead and you have conversations with some of the most amazing performers in the world, they'll tell you, I'm thinking about like Lady Gaga or Pink in particular. They'll tell you that they've had to leave people behind who didn't support them. And people become jealous. I've had people who were jealous of my success, and it hurts. It hurts. I am unconditionally supportive of anybody's success as long as it doesn't, that they treat people kindly. So for all of us, we have an obligation to ourselves and to rise to our highest level of accomplishment and purpose. And the way that we do that is not by listening to the voice of other people. It's by listening to our own heart and to ignore those other voices. And then comporting yourself and carrying yourself in a way that is commensurate with the values that you believe that are important to you. It's easy for people to criticize. That's easy. It's really easy. There's a great quote by Teddy Roosevelt. Glory goes to the people who are not standing, I'm paraphrasing, but glory goes to not to the people who are standing on the sidelines, and not to the critics. Those people will always be there. The glory goes to the people who are in the ring, who are fighting with the blood and the sweat and the tears and the scars to show that they've gone out there to make things happen. That's where the glory goes. And frankly, let's be honest, Tanya, that's the reason why I'm on the call today, right? That's the reason I'm here, is because at the end of the day, I got a lot of battle scars. Some of them were really unkind. Some of them were really hurtful. And so I'm going to answer that question. You asked me that question, but I'm going to give you one other piece of advice. And then nobody ever told me this, but I ended up doing it. Is that we as entrepreneurs have to figure out a way to dust ourselves off. Because if you go through this idea that you're not going to encounter challenges or problems or people, then you're fooling yourself. You will have the naysayers and the doomsdayers and, the wagging of the fingers. And that is part of the test of the journey. But your job is to go ahead and dust yourself off. And how quickly you can dust yourself off and become resilient, how quickly you can snap back, is going to be a determinant in your ability to succeed. I'm going to repeat that. Your ability to go ahead and pick yourself up after you've taken it on the chin is actually more important than almost anything else, because it is going to happen. You're going to start a business and some people aren't going to like the idea, or you may fail. You may fail. I'm not worried like that. I'd rather work with somebody who's failed, a 12 times than one person who got lucky. Person who got lucky doesn't learn anything. They believe that they have some sort of great, expertise, but a lucky person usually doesn't get lucky more than once. The person who's failed, they may be on the wrong path, but they've tried and they know it doesn't work. So now we can start from a place. I should say this: if they've failed, but they're coachable, they're mentorable, they're willing to learn, the learning piece again, right? I'd much rather work with those people who've tried a bunch of different things. Oh, I tried this and it didn't work, or I tried that and it didn't work. I've tried a number of different things that didn't work. I tried a cricket farm. I tried to go ahead and raise crickets for food. They all died. They all died. They wouldn't reproduce and they all died. And then I started thinking, I'm like, how many people are going to want to eat crickets? By the way, if you haven't tried crickets, they're actually pretty tasty. The only problem is the little legs that get stuck in your teeth, but
Yeah.
small price to pay for protein that doesn't go ahead and increase global warming. So go ahead.
I had a question that came in. It says, you stated that you left corporate America because you felt you weren't on the right path. Could you expand more?
Yeah. So, there's a quote that goes, either you're working on your own goals or you're working on somebody else's goals. And I had gotten into a really bad automobile accident after working. Part of this was luck, but not all of it, but a small portion of it was luck. In that I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a graduate degree, and I couldn't get a job. And so I took whatever job, and the job that I ended up landing in was as an assistant local area network administrator, because I went to the city of Philadelphia. I went to the person who was in charge, and I said, I need a job. And they said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know. What do you got? And she said, I got an assistant local area network administrator. And I said, I can do that. And she said, what do you know about computers? And I said, nothing, but I said, I can do it. And so I ended up being in that position, and that expanded into a series of successive roles in learning about computers. And in a very short time, in my early 20s, I was in settings that I was the only 20 some odd year old, because I knew it was the confluence of timing as well, because technology was starting to take off in a way and take hold in a way that is probably unimaginable to many of the people who are listening to this. But there were no computers then. We still had landlines. Nobody had really cell phones at the time. And it was a meeting of the moment. And so I learned a lot of things. And so, but the problem is that as I continued to move up and was working with the chief technology officer from Johnson & Johnson and all these amazing accolades, I would sit in these meetings and it would be a beautiful day out. And I was like, I don't want to be in this meeting. I don't care about whether or not we have this or that. Like, it's beautiful out. I want to go out there. Like, why can't we go out there? Why are we sitting in this stupid meeting having this stupid conversation about this stupid stuff that's not going to have any impact on my life? And then I got into that car accident, and it was that was a reawakening to say, hey, listen, baby girl, you got to get on with it, because otherwise you're going to look back on your life and you're going to say, all you did was send a bunch of meetings and a bunch of corporate meetings. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Look, everybody has different responsibilities. So I want to be clear about this. This is my pathway. For everybody listening, they may have different pathways. Maybe that security is important to them. And if you have kids in a family, it's a different set of obligations. But for me, I didn't want to look back on my life and realize that I'd spent the lion's share of my time in a bunch of meetings where people were dictating where I needed to be and when. And so I quit. I went into my boss. I said, well, I'm going to be quitting because I got some other stuff to do. And I put a pair of jeans and a toothbrush in a backpack, and I went off to Asia, to places where they don't sell Coca-Cola. And went traveling by myself for about 3 months to figure out what I wanted to do. And it was during that time that I realized I was not having the impact that I wanted. And I was violating some of the early things that I had said to myself in college. And so I then came back and started I guess at that point, it probably would have been my third business. one, two. Yeah, it was my third business at that point in time. And so I built that up and then sold it. And then I retired. So in my mid 30s, I retired. And then I got bored, you know.
Came out of retirement.
So this will be like the third time that's happened. So yeah, so that's, you know, you have to listen to your heart. You have to make sure that you are, Jody, you're welcome. You have to make sure that you listen to your heart. There'll be a lot of people who are going to tell you no. And the other thing that I would say is that don't let the confines of this world dictate who you should be and how you should represent yourself. I don't care who you are, what you look like, where you came from, what your sexual orientation is, your gender identity. You have an obligation to be you and unabashedly you. And you'll know when you're not on that right path, because there's that nagging feeling that says, man, I'm not doing the right thing. This is not where I want to be. This is not what I want to be on. And that started to grow. The din, the sound of that voice kept growing and growing. And that car accident really jolted me back into it and said, hey, you got to move on. And I think we owe ourselves an obligation. You don't owe anybody anything. None of us owe any. Our parents have done an amazing job of getting us to the point you don't owe them anything. Your job is to go ahead and find your own sense of purpose. And for me, it was really two pieces. One is I wanted to be able to take care of myself financially, and then find that sense of purpose in working with other people and helping other people achieve their own personal mission and objectives. And so that included working, coaching one-on-one with individual entrepreneurs, but also organizations that do the types of things that I'm interested in. So now I have an wonderful opportunity to work with two other new organizations, and their membership and the work that they're doing allows me, by extension, to help them better faithfully execute their own missions. So crafting that path that is uniquely your own is your obligation. That's your responsibility. My parents wanted me to go to law school. No offense to any of the lawyers out there, any budding lawyers or burgeoning lawyers. My husband's an attorney, but I tell that to him too. I would have made an awful attorney. I make a great entrepreneur, but an awful attorney. But that's what my parents wanted me to do, and for a variety of reasons that it's not worth getting into. But ultimately, I went into this thing called computers, and my dad said, well, what are you going to do that for? There's no future in that. All you're going to do is sit around and play video games all day. And he's kind of right about that, because now what I get to do is sit around and play video games all day because I really love it. I love the graphics. I love how they're designed. By the way, if anyone here plays Rocket League, I am willing to go ahead and challenge you to Rocket League on my Sony PlayStation 5. But I want to switch gears for a second, because I think we only have a couple more minutes left here. And what I wanted to just say was go back to this lifelong learning piece. During COVID, I had the opportunity to be able to, my husband was turning 50. And so I decided that since we can't get together with our friends, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a party, but we're going to do it in virtual reality. And so I bought a bunch of virtual reality headsets and I sent it to my friends. And then I built a world in virtual reality in the metaverse. How many people here, by a show of hands, how many people here have built a world in the metaverse? Grandpa over here has built a world in the metaverse. All right. So y'all need to catch up to me. Okay. I learned it. I sat down. I took the time to learn that, because that's the next generation of technology. That's where we're all going to be going. And so for my husband's 50th birthday, we all got in there. We started playing games, Cards Against Humanity, and it opened up a whole other world. And so one of the other nonprofits that I started now, way back when, is now really focusing on the role of virtual reality, metaverse, XR, and there's a whole series of things that I have the wonderful opportunity to be able to learn by just doing and experimenting and learning. to the extent that you can, as a part of your business and a part of your career, be on the cutting edge and the bleeding edge of new things that are coming out. There's so many exciting things. I hope I live long enough to be able to see all these amazing things that are coming along, self-driving cars and drones and metaverse, and the ability to go shopping in the metaverse. Let me tell you something. That is going to change everything. The ability to walk through a store virtually, pick up a product, look at it, turn it around. We can kind of do this now, but it's not the same thing. If you've not experimented with virtual reality in any sort of way, you are missing the opportunity on what is going. It's going to take a little while for us to get there. I think I always assumed when I was in graduate school, University of Pennsylvania, I said, wouldn't it be great to have an electronic version of a newspaper, so your hands didn't get all dirty? That's how old I am. And then the iPad came out. Now, that took a little bit longer. It probably took another 10 or 15 years after I had that idea. I didn't invent it. I want to be clear about that. What I'm saying, though, is that your ability to understand these things, there's nothing special about me. There's nothing that great that makes entrepreneurs any different except the willingness to learn and to put yourself out there and to ignore the people who are going to be the naysayers and the doomsdayers. Those people will always be there. They'll always be there. The rare breed, though, is the person who rolls up their sleeves and say, you know what, I don't care about that because this is the direction I'm going. And then building effective teams and networks in order to be able to support your vision of what you want to see. And helping those people buy into that vision because that becomes a part of their own vision.
Very important stuff.
Yeah.
Network is like the garden. Got to keep it going, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You never know. Like, you never know where things. I had a wonderful opportunity to coach a woman in Uzbekistan, a Muslim woman who started a makeup company. And there was two things that came out of it. One of the things was I was with her and a bunch of other men, and she said that she wanted to go ahead and figure out a way to build a side of her business for men who would have like facial products and those sorts of things. And everybody in the majority of the rest of the students, I would say it was probably like a 60-40 mix, but all the men started laughing. And so in my class, you don't get to laugh at people for ideas, I mean, unless it's kind of a funny idea, but you don't that doesn't work. When I was in Russia teaching a class, one of my students said something and the other students were laughing at his English. And so I yelled at them to you don't get to laugh at that. As she was talking about this idea, I said, say more about this. Okay. She told me a little bit more. Then I asked her to sit down. And so I pulled the men in the room. And I said, how many men in here feel like tell me a little bit more about your willingness to use these? Well, it's very dry here in Uzbekistan and Tashkent, but we would use these products, but we don't want to go in a store that's a makeup store because that's where women go. I said, oh, okay, so this is not really an issue about whether or not the product's going to be used. It's really the optics or the shame of a man going into a makeup store. So as a part of the exercises that I do a lot of different exercises with the students that I have, but one of them is to get them together to work on a business model canvas in order to be able to create a business model. And so the next day I came in and I said, hey, guess what we're doing? We are building a store that whether it's virtual reality, and we're going to break up the teams and the men or the women, and we're going to create a series of stores, and you guys have to come up with the business model for men and moisturizer. And so I say this because in that particular place, in that particular culture, the nature of ideas are, there's not often a lot of support. In fact, this particular woman who I speak with regularly, she came back, she texted me one day and we got on a call and she said, my husband doesn't want me to work and neither does my father. They both said that they're willing to go ahead and pay for me to stay home. I said, okay. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? And she said, I love what I do. I said, well, then you go home and you just make it very clear that that's the pathway that you're on. We have a wonderful opportunity in this country, and we forget about that. We forget about just how fortunate that we are. We're all sitting in places that, allow us to be protected and feel safe. Not everybody has that. I have students that are dodging bullets and missiles. And each of us who is either listening to this or as a part of this, we're granted a wonderful gift of time, but that is a finite measure. And so what you do with that, I have 24 hours, the same 24 hours that everybody else does. What you choose to do, how you choose to spend that time is what makes all the difference. And so I would encourage you, there's a philosopher that said the unexamined life, I think it was Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. And then fast forward to Henry David Thoreau, who went into the woods at Walden and said, you know, poor is the man who has spent his life working for another and not really contemplated whether or not that they're on the right path. And when I use man, I just mean that in the generic term, I mean person, non-gender specific. For all of you, those of you that are students, and I don't care where you are in your age is a cage. It doesn't matter to me how old you are, you know. Then that was brought home when I was working at Johnson & Johnson, and when I was 20-something-year-old sitting there with all these other mostly ostensibly straight white men with gray hair, and I was the youngest person in the room, and here I was bopping in there and like, hey, here's what we're gonna do because we're gonna save us a lot of money. And they're like, who is this character? And I said, here's what we're gonna do. And a lot of those people, I was able to go ahead and help them find new jobs because I took their jobs away by the application of technology. And it felt very rewarding to know, particularly those people who hadn't treated me that kindly, that we were able to go ahead and find other ways for them to be employed in other places because we were able to apply technology. I'm being very kind about the way that I say that, but really be very, very suspect about things that are holding you back and be introspective about it. That curiosity piece and that education, man, it'll just take you really, really far. So, ooh, all right, one final question, and then I got to pop off here.
Okay, thank you so much for all.
Oh, okay. No, I thought she had a question. So, if there is any questions, I'm happy to go ahead and take a couple minutes. Thank you, Susie, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Any other questions?
I didn't have any more that came in.
Tanya, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today, and
yeah,
come and see us in Morgantown.
Yeah, listen, I would love to. My travel schedule for the next couple of months is going to be really crazy. So the State Department is sending me over to Armenia to go teach entrepreneurship. Yeah, so I haven't been there yet. So that'll be exciting to go learn. It's great. I mean, I can travel to all these places, but what's really wonderful is when I get to go to a new place and I get to spend a couple of days with entrepreneurs, and then they teach me about their culture and their language and their food and travel around with them. It's a wonderful opportunity. Hey, Tanya, listen, thank you for all that you do and the hard work that you do and the rest of the teamwork the team does there. And to all the students, go get it, man. The world is there for yours. Go take it. Don't go ahead and wait for opportunity to knock. Open the doors and start going after it.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.